We are now halfway through our Mold Month series here this August, and I thought before moving forward and giving you guys even more practical advice than what we've already gone through, that I'd pause and take a look at the number one thing that I see block people from moving forward in their mold journey. And this is emotions. In the episode right before this one, I broke down for you a super simple, super effective mold treatment plan that works every time. However, because of the nature of mold and the inherent steps involved in healing from it, I frequently see people paralyzed in moving forward in their mold journey and therefore not healing. In today's episode, I'm sharing the top 4 most common emotions I see come up for people as they face mold, and then I'm also sharing my top 3 recommendations to overcome these emotions, aka not suppress them, so that you can help yourself be able to continue to take steps towards healing from mold every single day. Whether you think you're sick from mold or know you're sick from mold, but have found yourself in a standstill in healing, then this episode is for you. Hey friend, welcome to the Better Belly Podcast. If you're currently trying endless supplements, doctor visits, and diet changes to heal your mystery symptoms, you are in the right place. We're here to solve the real root causes behind your gut, hormones, skin, sleep, and brain concerns. Literally anything and everything in your body. My name is Allison Jordan. I'm a functional medicine practitioner that has supported over 150 clients just like you to heal problems that no one has been able to fix. You don't need a perfect diet or a random supplement you found on Instagram to heal. You need a proven system that heals your whole body from the inside out. That's what I'm here to share with you, episode by episode. It's time to make health easy again. And just as a reminder, this information is not meant to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your own health practitioner before you make any changes to your health. Hey friend, you have found yourself on an episode on mold and emotions, and I just want to say, because you're here, just a heartfelt, I see you, I understand what you're going through. I have worked with hundreds of clients going through this. I have dealt with mold in my health, which I'm going to be sharing about in the next episode, which hasn't released as of this recording, and I'm really excited that you're here in terms of I hope that this is a breath of fresh air in terms of content around mold, because there's a lot of stuff out there that's just practical things on mold, which is so important and so helpful. And even sometimes the practical things can I get insurance to cover mold? Just understanding that aspect of it, for example, can sometimes even help the emotions be less big. However, there are going to be days that you've probably experienced that even just knowing all the things, I know all the things, and even when which I'm going to share about again in the next episode that's going to be released, even knowing all the steps and knowing the majority of the answers to the most common questions, still feel a lot of emotions when it comes to mold, whether it's just for the sake of my clients or the sake of my own health. So I want to talk about the top 4 emotions that I see coming up for people. I hope that naming them and then describing how it sounds in your head helps you. Just naming emotions is actually super powerful. And I'm not a psychologist, don't super want to get into the reasons why, but naming emotions makes them essentially less powerful because they are less mysterious, and we can also have more compassion to things that we can give a word to. So and this has to do with how our brains work, but basically if we have a word for something, we can understand it. And if we don't have a word for it, then it can be very confusing or we will never understand it. So here are the top 4 emotions and what it sounds like in your head, or what I hear people saying that can be really good examples of what they're like. I want you to, as you're listening to them, just ask yourself, do you recognize any of these in yourself? We're not going to fix them. The goal is not to be and here's how you fix them, but it's just to hold space. And even if you don't want to hold space for yourself, let me hold space for you as you listen. So the first emotion that I typically see come up for people is confusion or denial, though I think denial is like a less friendly way to say it. I do feel that people are more familiar with the concept of denial through the well-known like 5 stages of acceptance, and denial is the first stage of but I think confusion's like a better term. So the questions or the thoughts in your head are going to be like, is mold really impacting my home? It doesn't smell musty. I don't see spots like black, or like kind of mold spots on my house, or like, doesn't everybody have mold? Isn't mold everywhere? You can have questions about like, how long has mold been hurting me? Like if you're starting to really believe it, you might be starting to go down this trail of, well, I've lived in this home this many years, or you might be thinking about childhood, or a dorm you lived in, and just realizing maybe that you've had multiple exposures to mold. But there's all these thoughts coming at you very quickly of from the moment someone says, or the moment you think you have mold toxicity, it just comes at you. And it's this wave of all these questions that we don't have answers to when you first start this process. And there's even, again, that component of like, am I crazy? Is this really actually what's causing my problem? Because especially if their mold is so intangible, it's a very common emotion to feel, where you're going to feel like, well, I don't smell anything off and I don't see anything off. So if I can't smell it, I can't see it. If your 5 senses can't perceive it, it's much harder to believe. On top of that, something that this is more of a practical side of the emotion of confusion, but up into like in the decades leading up to this point of you getting this diagnosis or realizing you're mold sick, what has happened is that legally and in the real estate, at least in America, we have been hiding and covering up and not wanting to talk about and deal with the problem of mold in buildings in the US. And so you're not aware of that when you come into the mold conversation, but it just actually adds one more layer of confusion of like, no one talks about this. If that many people are sick, why doesn't my doctor know about it? My doctor says mold allergies exist, but this is mold toxicity. What's the difference? So again, I'm not going to answer all these questions, but the confusion and or denial component can make it really hard to move forward. Before I answer or talk about how to manage it, I do want to go through the next 3 emotions, and then I will talk about, again, not how to fix them, not how to manhandle them or suppress them, but how to hold them compassionately, because the confusion we don't have to like, knowing everything actually doesn't get rid of the confusion. I know a lot, and when I got a new mold symptom this year, that was very confusing to me. And there was definitely a confusion and denial component of it. But I'm going to talk about that in next week's episode when I talk about the tinnitus that I got this year for the first time in my life. Definitely go check that out if you want to hear a expert mold fighter talk about what a journey can be like dealing with mold in your body and in your home. So number 1 is confusion. Number 2, second emotion that I see, again, it might not happen in this order, but I tend to see it in this order, is the grief. So it starts to hit you, oh my gosh, how many years have I lost to mold? How many dollars that you've spent seeking out other health healing solutions? So it could be dollars spent on a practitioner appointment, dollars spent buying supplements, dollars on medications, whatever. How much quality of life have you lost to mold? How many events? You just start to feel the grief of like, if this is really true, how much have I lost to it? Why didn't I know about it sooner? And there can even be components. I definitely see this with if you are a parent. So it's like one thing if you like don't have children yet, but if you have children, you could also, you're currently in a mold sick home, then you're starting to think, is this affecting my children? Does this explain the symptoms they have, their irritability or their behavior problems or their bedwetting? Because you're learning about all the symptoms of how mold toxicity can show up in children. And you realize, could it be a big component of your child's ADHD or anger and outbursts or all sorts of different things that it can show up in children? And so even that can be like, it can feel that you've been violated in many ways of this home that you were trying to put nice furniture in, and you maybe or maybe not have been buying non-toxic products, and you try to feed your family healthy food, and Like you're showing up to this podcast because you're pursuing health actively, and yet it hasn't been enough. And that creates a lot of grief and frustration, which actually leads me to the third emotion, which is anger, which I used another word for it, like frustration, kind of throw that in with it. So anger is another emotion that I see commonly come up. So like, who did this to me? It could be thinking about like, we bought this home. It's like so new builds can totally have mold in them. It's a big problem. And maybe you're thinking, well, the builder did it to me, or the guy who installed the HVAC, or the roofer who didn't flash the roof right, or the person who didn't put on the rock sheet correctly. Whatever it is, it can feel like maybe someone did it to you. Why didn't I know about this sooner? Why doesn't anybody talk about this? Why did my doctor brush my symptoms under the rug for all these years? Why did this happen to me and not someone else? This can be a mix of that grief and anger, though I did put a lot of these under anger. You can have, I already said this, but I'm reading the sentence that I wrote down, just anger at the builder, the flipper. Maybe you like bought a home that's 100 years old and it was remediated or refurbished and it looks beautiful, but they didn't deal with a rampant mold problem, or they did something that caused a leak, or they cut corners in something and like putting in the new bathroom and the grout isn't sealed and now the bathroom's a problem. Whatever it is, there can be a lot of anger at maybe the negligence of another party, anger at yourself for not noticing the problem or dealing with it sooner. Like sometimes you maybe knew, yeah, there was this thing that like it didn't look quite right, but we can never really find where the leak was coming from or something like that. And there definitely can be a lot of anger at self. I've dealt with that a lot. Anger that your insurance won't cover it, which I'm not saying it won't, but there's a lot of situations where it won't. There is a really beautiful podcast episode that I listened to there, which I'm going to put in the show notes. There's a lawyer. She specializes in environmental illnesses and environmental cases. And she talks, and her whole practice is about like working with people who got sick. And it's like, if insurance doesn't cover it, ultimately, maybe there is a problem. Like, so the HVAC was installed incorrectly. This lawyer, she actually got mold sick and she didn't know it because her HVAC was put in incorrectly and it was creating condensation around the HVAC and then dripping onto the drywall and creating a mold problem throughout the house in the drywall. And insurance isn't going to cover it. And what happened is she ended up taking this case to court, and that HVAC company had to pay her out. I think it was like $200,000 when she won it. And that's like, there is a way that there sometimes can be compensation, whether it's through insurance or through legal action. If there really was you can actually go and check out, you can submit your case to this woman's legal company. So I'm going to put that in the show notes if you want to go listen to the episode that she has, and that episode then has a link to her company. You can submit your case and see if that is something that they can represent you in and possibly get some compensation, because mold is a very expensive, not just to remediate, but to like just be sick with long term. It's a very expensive illness to have. And then lastly, and kind of connected to all of the potential injustices of the mold, maybe like a landlord, maybe you're renting and there's a landlord who hasn't been addressing your concern for something that doesn't look right, or you now know that there's mold in the apartment or whatever you're renting and they still won't do anything about it. There could just be a big sense of injustice, which will create a lot of anger. And sometimes, again, we're feeling that anger so much, it makes you... Like, at least for me, I'll feel it so strongly in my body, and then I feel like I can't do anything else because I'm so wrapped up in the anger and wishing I had control and power, and then actually feeling more like a victim because in that moment, I can't just like write an email and get something done. It's a very long process to get any justice or to get any healing in mold. And so we definitely want to make sure that our emotions, while they are important and need to be felt and have compassion and empathy and self-compassion with it, we also don't want the emotion to then paralyze us from being able to move forward. The last big category of emotion that I see is overwhelm. And that is also going to maybe look or feel like paralysis and numbness. You're staring at this big, steep mountain of mold. You're wondering how much will it cost? And you definitely never know in terms of until you have a mold inspector find exactly where the mold is in your house, you can't get a remediator to estimate the cost of how much it will take to fix it. It could be a 10 grand solution. It could be a 100 grand solution. There's going to be, there's many steps that you need to hold in your mind. There's many things you don't know that are just unknown. Will insurance cover this? Can I break my lease? How many places in my home is the mold even affecting? How long will it take to remediate? And then you're going to start to have these thoughts. Well, hopefully you don't, but it's very common to have these thoughts. I'll never find a new place to live. I can't afford to leave this house. My landlord won't let me break my lease. And I want to be very, very clear. It's extremely understanding, like very, very reasonable to have this emotion of overwhelm. But it is also maybe the most dangerous emotion in the four to have, because our brains are very simple organisms. And if we let that overwhelm then translate into thoughts like, I'll never, I can't, they won't let me, then the brain will actually stop looking for solutions. It literally shuts down the right side of our brain, which is our creative, solution-seeking side of our brain. If we haven't, not just an I can't or I will never, there's an emotion like I will never be rid of this, that we can feel that emotionally. But if we let it translate in our brains as truth, then again, that right brain shuts down and it can make it very hard to move forward. Very, very hard, because if you're feeling that way, it is likely because there's no obvious next step for you of like, oh, it's so simple. I'll just do this thing. It'll be so obvious. Some people feel that there are more obvious or easy or go-to steps for them when it comes to mold. And that's fine. It just depends on all of our resources and people we know and whatever. But if you, for whatever reason, go from I'm simply feeling overwhelmed and I feel like this will never end to I believe it, it does make it really hard to then actually problem solve and think of new solutions, which all the time I have clients go from I couldn't think of anything to I totally found a solution and this is what it's going to be and it's working for us. Instead of like believing or really digging into like believing that I can't do something or I won't, we want to be able to compassionately hold that feeling in our body to acknowledge, yes, this is hard, but then replace the I can't in terms of like a truth that we believe with a question, how can I? And you might not have the answer. And like, just because you're going to suddenly ask, like, you're going to say on the left hand, I feel like this will never end. I feel like I'll never find a solution. But on the right hand, I'm going to still ask myself, but how could I make this work? It doesn't imply that suddenly the answer is going to be obvious, or by the end of the day, you're going to have a whole plan, or that you're going to know it right away. But it does imply you're just going to keep thinking about it. You're going to look for new solutions. You're going to Google things. You're going to talk to people. You're going to, like, as you drive around the city, think about where else could you live? Or you're going to think through the contacts of people you know and what their resources are and how they might be able to help you. We really want to keep our brain from going from shutdown stage to switching to solution seeking. Again, even if there's moments where the emotions are so intense that we're not always going to be in solution seeking mode. It's just true. I seriously encourage you to go and check out the next episode that's going to release. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you get a notification for it, because I'm going to walk you through what it has been like for me this year to get a new symptom, tinnitus, that I'd never had, and then be fairly certain it was mold, get a confirmation that it was mold, and then have to walk through that process of what does this mean for my family and where I live and where I'm going to live next and all this. So the question now becomes, with these four emotions swirling around, how can you practically get to the point where you can hold that emotion, feel it without being consumed by it? So these next three things I'm going to share are the 3 steps that I am constantly coaching my clients through that can help you feel the emotion, not suppress it, not we're not like being mean to it or being stupid self. Don't feel that. No, feel that way. This is a terrible, terrible situation to be caught up in. But how do we like hold that and still move forward and still make progress so that 6 months from now, you're not in the same place and you're closer to healing or being free from your mold symptoms. So the first step or the first thing I recommend is be with your emotions. How do you practically do that? Number one, I recommend you name the emotions. So this could just be sitting on your porch, curling up on your couch, pulling out a journal, yelling, I don't know. Or if you're musically inclined, like my husband, like pulling out some music that you feel like really, if you just like can think of songs that really embody how you're feeling right now, do that. But find a way that you can actually say, oh, this is what I'm feeling. I'm feeling anger. I'm feeling sadness. I'm feeling grief. I'm feeling injustice. I'm feeling overwhelmed. Those are the ones that I kind of found with my emotions, but maybe you're going to list some other emotions that I haven't listed. I'm feeling fear, all those different things. And you don't have to, you can be as granular and detailed as you want. I find that typically just getting to the point where you can actually be separated enough from the emotional chaos that you can start to see the emotions is actually calming. Even if you're not like fixing them, nothing's changing about your situation. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm just angry. I'm pissed. Like, this is so unfair, right? Let yourself feel that. I also encourage you, on top of naming the emotions, do give yourself time to feel them. There's going to be some days that you'll need more time. Like some days, maybe you have 5 minutes where you just need to really feel the emotion. Other days, it's going to be 30 minutes or an hour, where you just need time to be sad, time to go for a walk, curl up in a fetal position. I'm very much a big proponent of the fetal position in terms of a moment to basically reduce the amount of stimuli you are going through. So get a blanket, lay on a couch, lay on the floor, lay in your bed. It could be dark, whatever amount of stimulus feels good. Usually something quieter. Maybe this is like right before you go to bed. You're about to sleep. It's the only quiet time of the day because you've got kids and you've got job. But like let yourself lay there and cry or whatever. I totally actually did this, and I will talk about it in the next episode. Do this experience of naming your emotions and giving yourself time to feel as often as you need it. As you go through your mold journey, sometimes it'll feel like you're doing this 3 times a day. Other times you might be doing it once a week or once every 2 weeks, and you'll realize, wow, I haven't needed to manage my emotions as much, not because that I'm suppressing them, but because I'm just feeling better. I'm feeling more comfortable with this journey. I kind of know what my next steps are, or you're starting to get improvement with symptoms, which is usually feels like a big win to people. But definitely first step is just going to be with the emotions. And there's probably more ways to be with them, but those are the 2 that I find I probably utilize the most. Naming them, giving them time to feel, or giving yourself time to feel them. Second step is after you've spent time feeling, you want to do what you can. And I know that might sound really vague, but the reason I wrote it that way, or I'm saying it that way, is because mold has a lot of steps to it, and you probably won't be doing tons of those steps in one given day. Some of the reasons behind that is mold illness comes with a lot of things like brain fog, fatigue, chronic pain, and these things can really limit your actions where you just don't have enough oomph to take 20 steps related to mold and do your job and take care of yourself and take care of your family and take care of your home, things like that. So do what you can, but do something. And here's a list of ideas of like very, very small things that like when I went through this process and when I have clients going through this process, I really try to make a big deal about and like congratulate myself, congratulate them, be like, hey, this is a big deal that you did this thing. Even though maybe the symptom hasn't changed and the mold's not out of their house yet, you can do a Google search for a provider who can help you heal your body from mold. Like you're listening to this podcast episode right now. This counts. This counts as the one thing you did today to help yourself move forward in mold. Woohoo! Amen. Thank you, Jesus. doing anything where it's like maybe you're going to do a Google search to find a certified mold inspector, which I gave you a bunch of resources on how to find one in the previous episode, the 3-step mold treatment plan. But you're going to do a Google search to learn more about like, can insurance cover mold? You're going to, whatever it's going to, even if you don't like get your insurance to cover it that day or nothing starts, just like getting more information under your belt to be able to take maybe that quote unquote bigger step in a week from now or 2 weeks from now. Other ideas might be listening to a podcast episode to learn more about the remediation and inspection process, or to learn more about practical ways you can support yourself as you heal from mold, or to learn about like, should I bother with even buying a, air filter? Does an air filter matter? How do I find an air filter? Like all those things that we tend to ask ourselves as we're going through the healing process. I really like, other than my own podcast, I really like the Mold Finders Radio podcast. I know it's a little confusing. It's not a radio station. It's just called Mold Finders Radio. I have a link in the show notes. It's by my friend who actually came on the podcast 2 episodes ago and talked about the 5 signs of hidden mold, Brian Carr. He runs that podcast. He has doctors on there. He's a certified mold inspector, one of the best in the country, I would say. And he talks a lot about the practicals in remediation and inspection. And I love it. I love it. If you listen to one of those podcast episodes a day for a month, you're going to know so much more. And maybe that's your one step you can like psychologically manage every day. Another thing that I personally count is taking a nap. Like if you feel all your emotions and then you're just exhausted, and you're exhausted because you're sick, you're exhausted because it's emotional. If you take a nap so you can have energy to take care of your kids that evening, that is you helping yourself feel more positive about this process, that like you don't have to do everything right now. Mold will be dealt with, and you're choosing peace, even though mold wants you to choose anxiety. And I say mold wants you to choose anxiety because it's neuroinflammatory. Mold literally is setting your brain on fire, and it wants to make your amygdala go off like a crazy person. And when we say, yes, my brain has some neuroinflammation that's making me extra anxious, on top of the fact that just the process of mold is like a big process that can make someone anxious, I'm going to choose to downregulate and take a nap. That's a huge win in my mind. So the key to this step, though, is just do something and give yourself credit for very, very steps that might seem super small, but they are steps that will empower you so that one of the days you'll be able to actually hire the right mold inspector and save money and finally get the information you need. And then from there, actually know, are we going to stay in this home? Are we going to sell it? Or are we going to break our lease? Like, as you get to learn the techniques for how to do these things and how to make those decisions, then you empower yourself to be able to move forward. So that's step number 2. And the third step to walk through this process of both holding your emotions and moving forward is build your mold support community. Let me talk about this for a second, because even saying that might be slightly triggering. So as humans, when we go through anything super intense, like anything, this could be good things like planning for a wedding, or it could be really bad, scary, negative things like walking through a cancer diagnosis. But whenever we as humans go through anything really big and intense, the thing we need the most, other than maybe the plan that's actually going to get us from point A to point Z, is our community. Because community is something we psychologically need. Community around us helps confirm to us that, yes, the thing we're going through is really hard. Like the first time I got pregnant, I just really had a hard time being compassionate with myself and being like, giving myself grace that I was super tired all the time from being pregnant. And my community was like, you're growing a living human being 24/7, give yourself grace. And so community can actually help us confirm what you're going through is a big thing. Community also can protect us from hardships of that trial. Maybe they can't do everything about the hardship, but like going back to the baby analogy, it's very common that a community will bring food to a couple who recently had a baby. And that's because they know we can't feed your baby at 2 a.m. We can't, bond with your baby for you. We can't do a lot of things for you, but we can bring you food, and that helps reduce the hardship of your trial. And community can share our feelings, which is like the psychological equivalent of sharing our burden. Even if they can't share in your sickness, they can't like take 10% of your nausea or your headaches or your bloating for you. When they share your feelings and say, man, I feel your anger with you. I feel your grief. I feel your pain. I feel your frustration with you. That actually makes it easier for us. Like it feels lighter for us. So here's the problem though. The problem that with mold is that the way that mold currently is in society and how society views it, at least in America, is that it's not something that people will automatically rally around when they hear you're sick because of it. So instead of being met with, OMG, you have a cancer diagnosis, I'm so sorry, how can we help? We're met with mold illness, mold's everywhere. How can you possibly be sick with that? It's like super devalidating. It hurts like heck. And it's like the opposite of what we need based off of like what we're supposed to get for intense circumstances. So once you've dealt with your feelings in step 1 and you've started moving forward with the little steps you can manage each day, I recommend that the third step, and honestly, basically one of the little steps you make, is starting to find a community, probably like multiple types of communities who can support you in this mold journey. Now, there are 2 main places I recommend you seek out your mold support community. Number 1 is going to be draw on current relationships. That could be friends, family, church, neighbors, etc. This is the one that probably hurts the most in many ways because not everyone is going to understand you. And you really have to expect that some people will never sympathize with your situation. They might even explicitly and multiple times tell you that you're making it up in your head. It's so sad that everybody understands having a baby is hard and everybody accepts it. And everybody understands that putting a wedding together is hard, and we accept it and we support it. And we just don't get that with mold. But there are some tips that I have for if you have someone who doesn't, which is honestly going to be most people, who don't automatically understand like, wow, mold, I know exactly what you're going through. This is horrible. How can we support you? Like, that's just not the normal response. Here's some tips on how you can take people who do care for you and help educate them in a way that they can come on board with you, even if they like don't even fully understand everything you're going through, that they can at least like kind of emotionally be there for you and not basically question every problem you're going through. So number 1, you want to communicate with those around you as clearly as possible. So communicating clearly, and maybe it's like really the only step, is super key. Communicating clearly has a couple components to it. Number 1 is being able to communicate in a non-threatening way. Meaning, one of the problems I've seen people run into when they are communicating their mold illness is that they feel very heated about it. They feel very misunderstood. But when someone senses that, whether they're a friend or a spouse or a parent, they then feel defensive, and they might not even fully understand why. They can just tell that, wow, this is a really heated situation. I don't know what's going on. And I'm kind of being whatever, like I need to be on board with them, but I don't know if I am. And I now feel defensive. So just be calm when you try to communicate this to them in terms of like, set a time like, hey, I really want to talk to you about something or tell you about something going on in my life. When would be a good time to chat? This is like including your spouse. You like even someone you see on a day-to-day basis. You want them to be able to pick a time that they're like, okay, I'm not too tired and I'm not in the middle of work and I'm not dealing with my kids. Here's a good time. And if it's a friend, maybe it's like, can I set up a coffee date? I have something I'm going on in my life right now. I really want to talk about it with you. So communicate clearly means communicate calmly. Next thing is going to be, most people, I find it's helpful if you do have some tangible evidence. Now, I don't think you have to have this to sit down and tell someone like all your rationale for why you think you're mold sick, but it really does help if you have some type of testing, honestly, is the main thing. So Like an organic acids test is the main thing I run with my client, or a mycotox test. If you have one of those two things and it shows high mold levels on the test, super, super helpful. Another thing would be something called the dust test, which I talked about in the previous episode, which is a home mold test that's actually trustworthy, unlike an air sample test, or even a lot of mold inspectors are really bad out there. So, once you have like tools that you can really show them these levels are high, they're abnormally high, they're like not helpfully high, and it correlates with my symptoms, which if you want to know, do your symptoms correlate with mold, or you want to give them a resource, if they want to listen to a podcast, you can send them to my episode, 220, which is 100 symptoms that mold can cause. I list out 100 of them. It's not even all of them, but it's a really solid chunk of symptoms that can be caused by mold. So you want to get tangible evidence, you want to communicate calmly. And then the other thing that I find is this kind of fits under tangible evidence, but also is slightly different because it's more subjective, is you can communicate your symptoms. And the fact is that what I find really interesting, and what I didn't even realize when I was super sick back in 2015 from other problems, is that you feel like you're so consumed with your illness all the time, and maybe your spouse sees that you have to lay on the couch again, or you'll tell them my stomach hurts, or you feel like maybe people should know how miserable you are because you feel that way all the time. But it's actually very interesting that many people, they're not as tuned in to the symptoms we're feeling because we haven't delineated it. So some really big breakthrough strategies that I've seen my clients go through, and even myself, is when you're sitting down calmly with somebody to try and educate them so that they can be on your team, and like really understand a lot more what you're going through, since they can't upload a file of like having a baby's hard or cancer diagnosis is hard. They don't have a pre-made file. We have to make this file of what it's like to be mold sick. You got to tell them your symptoms, when they started, how severe they are, how frequently. I deal with it every day. It's every other day. It's morning to night. It's every evening. How it impacts you. It makes it really hard for me to make meals for my kids. I dread every meal that I eat. I don't want to go out. Even if you think they already know it, you can just tell them like, hey, I actually just want to tell you all the symptoms I'm going through because I think you know some of them, but maybe you don't know all of them. And I also think that this might help you understand how desperately I need this to be solved. And if you can describe the correlation of mold causes all these things, then, or like hand them my episode 220 of like the 100 symptoms it'll cause, then that can help them be like, oh, I understand. Or maybe they'll be like, I understand why, like, you and your husband, if this is like a friend, you and your husband both have two totally different sets of symptoms, but both could be being caused by mold. Now that they understand that, then they can be more empathetic and, again, just like simply understand what you're going through. So that's the first thing, is I almost want to use the word, you want to convert. You want to convert your people who are already immediately around you into that level of education. And again, you really can't expect, you have to expect that not everyone will understand, and that maybe many won't. And that shouldn't stop you from moving forward. But do maybe be creative both with who you think of sharing this. Like, you might get an ally in an unexpected place or from an unexpected person. But then the other thing is that if there's anybody you really want to fight for, like, not like actual fight, like a punch, but if you really want to kind of mentally wrestle with, I really want them on my team. And if they're not, the only person I'd say it's really worth putting your energy into converting them, if they are resistant to it, the only person it's worth putting that energy into is a decision maker in your house. Meaning, usually it's your spouse, but maybe it's like a roommate or a boyfriend, girlfriend if you live with them. Maybe it's a parent if you like live with them and they're a decision maker. Because you want to be together on the decisions you're going to have to make to get better, whether you're going to leave the home or stay, remediate or not, what provider you're going to work with to heal your body, what providers you'll work with to heal your home, aka remediation and inspection. How, like, all of these decisions, it's really great to have well, actually, it's really necessary. If there's a decision maker, someone who actually has authority in approving decisions, or someone who's going to gripe about it if they don't approve it and really make it psychologically miserable for you, you really want to get them on board. So here's my recommendations for getting, usually this is a spouse, so I'm going to just say spouse. Recommendations for getting a spouse on board. Number one, you want to think through and or journal these questions. What has helped you both get on board with the decision in the past? Especially a decision that maybe you didn't initially see eye to eye on. How did you overcome disagreements or not seeing eye to eye on big decisions in the past? You also especially want to think of decisions that were financial. So how, like maybe you didn't agree on the home you ended up buying because it's a big financial decision, but what were key moments and key steps and you coming together and like coming to an agreement? This will help you just reflect on what you've already achieved as a couple in terms of going from maybe not seeing eye to eye to seeing eye to eye. And that doesn't mean that it was a fast process or that it was happy the entire time, but it does give you something to mull on of how have you already successfully done this in the past. It gives you hope too. The next thing is I encourage my clients to analyze that information and think about like what really helped you guys get on board with each other in the past. Like what was motivating to them? Some people are really, will get on board with emotion. So there's ethos, which is ethics, logos, which is logic. And I'm just blanking on what the, in terms of argument style or persuasiveness, like persuasion techniques, some people are really persuaded with just the emotions of somebody. Some people are persuaded by lots of logic. What persuades them? When you looked at like what really was a motivating factor. Some people are really persuaded when they simply are somebody who like did the research themselves. Some people are really persuaded when they know that they're going to be a part of the process. Like some spouses really get on board when it goes from like, this is all out of your control, I'm going to make decisions just to remediate the house, to like, how about you pick the person who's going to retile our bathroom and you're going to find the best person to do the XYZ thing, especially if that spouse feels really skilled in that area. It really elevates them from like, all these things are going to happen without my approval or without my involvement, to like, I'm an active partner in this. And some spouses want that. So it really kind of depends on the nature of the spouse. I also would say, if they're going to do their own research on mold, I would recommend that you beseech them to do their research with at least some of the resources that you recommend, since many mold resources can be super misleading. So hand them the Mold Finders Radio podcast, hand them this podcast, hand them some of the free resources that Mold Finders Brian Carr put together. Listen to Dr. Jill Krista or Dr. Jill Carnahan, who are doctors who specialize in mold illness. I'm going to put they have a couple different resources, including like an Instagram you could follow and a podcast that usually aren't like all about mold. They also talk a lot about Lyme and pans and pandas. And so they're not like the Mold Finders is like super specific to mold, which is why I like it. As far as like, if you want to give them a resource, they can just like freely go through, but whatever resources you're handing to them, just like advocate that they do if they're going to do research on their own to like be persuaded, that they look through some of the resources you've already basically pre-approved. Next thing with talking with them, this is just reiterating what I already shared about kind of quote unquote converting friends and family, which is you want to reduce the threat response. So this is where their brain is going to feel threatened or attacked. This can happen if we're talking fast, or like if you shift suddenly from like crying that you are feeling miserable to like, this is why we have to get rid of mold, and they're still not on board. It's a very emotionally tumultuous situation, and they likely are not going to feel safe enough to come see it your way. So instead, you'll do things like ask them when is a good time to meet, that you want to talk with them about something important. You plan that time. They know that when they come to that moment, you're going to talk about something. You know it. You can plan for it. You can like write out your notes and your thoughts, write out like the symptoms you want to share, talk about any proof that you have that you're mold sick, like lab testing. You can like print it out to show it to them. You can kind of just get your thoughts together so that when you do go to talk to them, you can be very calm and very clearly just say like, thank you for meeting. This means a lot to me. I've been going through a lot. I think you know some of this, but I wanted to outline it clearly for you. And then give you time to respond and clearly share like your concerns or your thoughts. Even saying that on the front end will help them know like, it's not just going to be a monologue. You want to work together with them. And you can say that like, I want to work together with you on this. Like, I want to be a team. I don't want this to be something where both feel like I'm dragging you through. And then when you do share everything, you would end kind of your big sharing of your symptoms and the proof that you're mold sick and stuff with inviting them to respond. So the question could kind of be like, what questions do you have now? Or what do you feel is keeping you from being able to be on the same team to me? Or what feels unclear? And if they ask a question you don't know the answer to, you can be very honest. Say, I don't know the answer to that yet. I'm actually still working on getting those answers. As I get that answer to that question, I'll share it with you. And you can even say, like, if you want to look through the same information I'm learning from, I can share those resources with you. But again, some spouses won't really be into like doing as much work as you're going to be doing to like learn about mold. That's fine. If this is all done in a kind of a slow speech, eye contact, non-noisy or distracting environment, so like kids aren't running around, usually people are going to then sense your authenticity, your care for them, honestly, just like the care that you put into like delivering this otherwise highly charged information. And people typically respond with care and thoughtfulness as they have space to feel their own feelings and then share their thoughts. However, if you feel like you really did all this really well and you were, you planned it out and you communicated clearly and you were calm and stuff, and it still doesn't go well, like they're really belligerent about it or they don't want to be on board, you can consider, the last thing that I have clients consider is marital counseling. And this doesn't mean you failed. It means that you have room for growth in strengthening your marriage, and that actually mold in this situation is setting you up for a positive outcome where you're actually closer to your spouse than you were before. So like mold gives you the opportunity to build you and make you stronger, not just internally, but also relationally. All right. So you can build your mold community with people immediately around you. And especially, if you're going to spend any time on somebody who's resistant, only spend time on somebody who's a decision maker in your household. And then the other place you're going to look is outside of family and friends. And the typical places this is going to be things like Facebook groups. There's one in particular I really like, the Toxic Mold Answers group by Matt Kelly, who's my friend. It's just a really great place. I've been in there for a long time. I find that it's a generally supportive place where people are sharing their expertise. It doesn't seem too often that people are sharing bad advice. Every now and again, someone just like shares really weird advice. But then other people will call it out and be like, no, that's not true actually. So I find that it's got like 20,000 people in it right now. It's probably more by the time you join. And it's just a really great group. Pros to the Facebook group approach. There are a lot of mold Facebook groups other than this one, but it's usually going to be free and it's usually full of heartfelt people who have either gone through the process themselves or are currently going through it. And that just creates like everybody immediately gets it. Nobody's questioning, is mold really a problem? Or if somebody is, like they're early in their journey and they're vastly outnumbered by all the other people who are like, yes, mold's a problem. So it's really nice where you go switch from like the majority of your friends and family not knowing what mold illness is to like, wow, everybody here knows it. It's really nice. Some cons to Facebook groups is sometimes, I'm just gonna be honest, sometimes they're depressing to sift through because there's so many sick people, or you see so many pictures of like mold in homes and stuff. So sometimes you like want to spend small amounts of time dipping in them and dipping out. They're definitely not as organized. It's not like a course you're going to take to heal. So it's not going to be like an A to Z process. It's more, again, this like ad hoc people just sharing random stuff, which I think is good. It's more of like an organic human way to share information, but it's not always good because you're like, is that step G or step B? I can't tell when I should be taking this step that they're talking about. It can also be distracting because everybody talks about different remedies and it's not always clear, like, is this actually effective or is this like a waste of money? So, like there are, again, moderators in Facebook groups, but usually a really active mold Facebook group, like my friend Matt Kelly's, like people just share stuff. And sometimes it's really cool. They'll just say, this worked for me, this supplement or this air filter or this whatever. But that can sometimes be distracting because there's so many things that people are talking about that maybe then you're like paralyzed with, again, like too many decisions to make. What do I try? And so that's kind of like a more of a con. Another place to find community outside of your family and friends, I'd say, is like a podcast and Instagram, because you can listen to shared stories. You can get more people in your just feed or like day-to-day interaction, even if it's like, again, it's, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm not talking with you, but I am, you are hearing my voice, like, but you're getting more things in your daily thought patterns that are saying, yes, this is a thing. Yes, this is a thing. Mold is a thing. It will make you feel less alone. I do like my podcast. I like Mold Finders Radio. I like something called the Resiliency Podcast by Dr. Jill Carnahan. Again, it's not all mold stuff. So that's the one thing I'll say is there's like Lyme in there. There's Pans and Pandas. Those are like the three things she talks about the most. So it's not always the most focused, but then there's also Instagram, Dr. Jill Krista, Dr. Jill Carnahan, and then We Inspect. I'll just have the links in the show notes. That these are the same people that I tend to just find have really good, concise information on mold. They're compassionate, they're well educated. It's really great. Pros to this, again, is typically it's going to be free to engage in all this. Cons is still not as organized. I actually didn't write down my pros and cons for this, so I'm trying to think of them off the top of my head. Yeah, still not as organized. I think the free is a huge win because there's so much to learn about it, but not being organized can be hard because when I've gone through really organized mold trainings, I have found it so much more helpful for my brain to feel like I can categorize certain pieces of knowledge and I can understand what order they come in. And I've taken so many different types of mold education things, and I've put all that education and information into my program, the Better Belly Blueprint, which kind of leads us to the third option to find a mold community, which is joining what I would call a paid healing group. This could be like some type of group coaching program, like my program, the Better Belly Blueprint, where we literally have like a course that takes you A to Z, how to heal through a whole slew of things, including mold, but also things like parasites, H. pylori, low stomach acid, things that you're going to have to deal with before you get to mold anyways. You'll learn more about that if you go listen to episode 223, the 3-step mold protocol. But also like maybe that quote unquote paid healing group is working with a mold literate doctor. This is going to be someone who's going to help make a plan for you. Because the two groups above, they don't really make a plan for you, but they can talk about details of different steps of the plan, which is still helpful. So the pros to this is that it's very organized. It has a process. You can usually get some type of one-to-one care, whether it's, the mold literate doctor or in my group coaching group, or group coaching, you get a live biweekly group coaching calls that are also recorded. So you can go back and listen to them anytime. You have a private Facebook group that you can ask questions that get answers to, like, one-to-one, very specific to whatever your question is, answer. So that's a huge pro. It's just very pointed and it can really help you make those next steps. And the cons is typically going to be, it costs something. Now, I think eventually the mold healing journey is going to cost something. The remediation, the supplements, the labs with somebody, it's going to cost something. But there's different ways. There's more expensive ways to, more expensive healing groups and healing things you could do, and then there's less expensive ones. And I have made the Better Belly Blueprint the most affordable way to heal from mold that I possibly know of, compared to, it's literally the cost of the program is on average the cost of a first appointment with a functional doctor, which functional doctors are not covered by insurance. Super sad, but super true. If your functional doctor is covered by insurance, they're not doing functional medicine, which is super weird to say, but I've never really seen that happen. Because insurance doesn't cover the types of things, like the specific things you do in functional medicine, insurance doesn't cover. And so it's hard for them to do functional medicine if they are expecting insurance to cover everything. Not to be depressing, but just to like set expectations and like even give you a red flag if like someone's actually going to be a good functional doctor. You really want to, but they're covered by insurance. You really want to nail them. Like, how does this actually work? Because like, how are you doing functional medicine when insurance doesn't cover most functional medicine labs and protocols and stuff? So that is the last thing. That is, this is like the framework I'm probably using most frequently to help people like deal with the emotions. And by deal, again, not fix, not suppress, not deride, but name the emotions, feel with them, be with them, have self-compassion, take tiny steps, and then get that really supportive community. Again, it's probably not going to happen in a day. It'll happen over weeks. And then as you have both the plan to heal, which I went over last episode, go check that out if you haven't listened yet, and then the basically ability to manage the emotions, then you can alternate between taking steps in the plan and then like having self-care with your emotions, taking steps in the plan, having self-care. And when you do those two legs, it's like walking, you make steps forward and you're not going to be in the same place as you were 6 months ago. All right, guys, this is a very long episode, but I loved it. I think this is exactly what I have not seen happen yet in mold content, is talking about something like this in depth. I hope that it meant a lot to you, that it soothed your heart a little. Maybe you had some tears. That's great. Maybe you have some more clear next steps on how you want to get support or care for yourself. But you can heal from mold. You will, if you keep taking steps forward. And I hope that this episode helped give you some tools to ensure that you are able to do that without losing hope and losing steam. And again, if you have not subscribed to the podcast, I highly recommend you do. We have even more mold-related podcast episodes coming up. We have over 200 episodes previously to this that talk about a lot of content, a lot of different types of symptoms, constipation, bloating, headaches, migraines, PMS, interstitial cystitis, fibromyalgia, SIBO, you name it, we've got topics on it. So do go check out all those episodes. And if you don't want to scroll through 200 episodes, you can also just get our free podcast vault where we've organized all the episodes by topic. So go to betterbellytherapies.com/get-the-vault or click the link in the show notes to get the Better Belly Podcast Vault. And I will see you guys in 2 days for our next episode. I hope to see you there. Hey friend, I hope you loved this episode. If you've been a fan for a while or newly loving this podcast, can you do me a favor? Drop into Apple Podcasts and leave me a review. When you leave a review, you do so much. You help me know you're listening. You can tell me what you're loving so I know what to make more of. And you help others by boosting this podcast so other people like you can find the podcast too. I mean, it's a win-win-win, right? So if you want a way to pay it forward, just go to Apple Podcasts or click the link in my show notes and leave a rating and review. And if you want some more free stuff, just head over to my free Facebook group, betterbellytherapies.com/Facebook, and you can get access to all of my free support for you, including some Facebook group exclusive stuff like my podcast episode vault, where you can search the Better Belly podcast by topic and find exactly what you need to expedite your healing. I cannot wait to see you in there. Catch you guys next week.